The courtyard of the Red Keep was deathly silent. A moment ago, it had been filled with laughter, cruel, sharp laughter, as Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, tormented his betrothed yet again. Sansa Stark stood frozen, her hands still trembling from where they had touched him. The boy king, golden-haired and cruel-eyed, lay sprawled on the stone steps below, his crown knocked from his head, a thin trail of blood running from the corner of his mouth. She had pushed him. The thought rang through her mind like the tolling of a great bell. She had pushed Joffrey Baratheon, king of the Seven Kingdoms, in front of everyone. It had not been planned. She had meant only to turn away, to escape the humiliation, the pain of his words, the sting of another slap, but he had grabbed her wrist, sneering, demanding she stay. And something inside her had snapped. The gasp of the gathered nobles, the shriek of Queen Cersei, and the furious roar of the Kingsguard filled the air. Sansa Stark. Cersei's voice was like ice and fire, her hands clutching at her golden hair. "You!" she choked on her own fury. "You killed my son!" Joffrey's body twitched. He was alive, barely. But for how long? The fall had been brutal, his skull cracked against the stones. Blood pooled beneath him. Sansa could not breathe. She had wanted this, hadn't she? She had dreamed of it on endless nights after he had her father's head struck from his shoulders. But now that it had happened, a firm grip seized her arm. "Run!" She turned, wide-eyed. It was Tyrion Lannister, her husband, the one man who had ever shown her kindness in this wretched court. "Now!" he hissed, eyes darting to the Kingsguard. Tyrion's grip on her wrist tightened, his short legs already moving as he tried to pull her away from the horror unfolding behind them. Sansa couldn't move. Her feet felt rooted to the ground, her body frozen in place. The realization of what she had done hit her in waves, first disbelief, then terror, then something else, something almost like satisfaction. But there was no time for that. "Sansa, run!" Tyrion hissed again, and this time she obeyed. The Kingsguard were in chaos. Some rushed to Joffrey's side, others turned to the Queen, waiting for her command. Cersei had collapsed beside her son, cradling his head, her wails of agony piercing through the courtyard. "She pushed him!" one of the nobles shouted. "The Stark girl, she. Seize her!" That was Cersei's voice. No hesitation, no doubt, only pure, unbridled rage. The command jolted the Kingsguard into action. Sandor Clegane, the Hound, hesitated for only a second before stepping forward, his broad frame blocking Sansa's only path to freedom. Tyrion swore under his breath. "Damn it!" But then, to Sansa's shock, the Hound turned his head slightly, locking eyes with her, and he stepped aside. It was only for a second, only the slightest movement, but it was enough. Tyrion pulled her forward and they ran. They fled through the halls of the Red Keep, past stunned courtiers and confused guards. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. "The girl killed the king! The Stark girl is a traitor! Find her! Find her now!" Tyrion didn't speak as they ran. Sansa's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had spent years trapped in these halls, yet they had never felt more suffocating than they did now. "Where are we going?" she managed between gasps. "To the only place they won't look first," Tyrion muttered, leading her down a darkened stairwell. "To the dungeons." Sansa nearly stumbled. The dungeons? She had imagined many things when she dreamed of escaping Joffrey's clutches, fleeing to Winterfell, sailing to the free cities, but this. Tyrion saw the hesitation on her face and sighed. "Trust me, my lady, this is the only chance we have." Sansa swallowed hard. Trusting a Lannister had cost her everything before, but Tyrion wasn't like the others. He had never struck her, never tormented her. He had offered her kindness when no one else did, and now he was helping her escape. She nodded once, and they descended into the darkness together. The air grew colder as they descended into the dungeons beneath the Red Keep. The walls dripped with dampness, the stench of rot and mildew clinging to the stones. Sansa's breath came in short, panicked gasps, but she forced herself to move, to follow Tyrion deeper into the labyrinth of darkness. She could still hear the shouts from above, the hurried footsteps of the guards searching for her. Her name was now a curse on their tongues: Sansa Stark, Kingslayer, traitor. The words clawed at her mind, making her stomach churn. Joffrey was dead. She had wanted this, dreamed of it. Yet now that it had happened, the reality of it was overwhelming. What would they do to her if they caught her? She already knew the answer. Tyrion pulled her sharply into a narrow corridor. "This way," he whispered. She didn't question him. There was no time for questions, only movement. At last they reached a heavy iron door, barely visible in the dim torchlight. Tyrion pounded on it twice in a strange rhythm. A pause, then another 3 knocks. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a small, grated window slid open. A pair of beady eyes peered through. "Lannister?" The voice was raspy, suspicious. Tyrion stepped closer. "No time to talk, Rugen. Let us through." The man behind the door hesitated. "You're asking for trouble, dwarf." Tyrion scowled. "Trouble and I are old friends. Open the door." With a reluctant grunt, the man slid the latch, and the door creaked open. Tyrion pulled Sansa inside. The room beyond was small, lit only by a single torch. Wooden crates lined the walls, and a trapdoor sat in the far corner, barely noticeable against the stone floor. Sansa's eyes darted to Tyrion. "Where does that lead?" "Out," he said simply. "Or close enough." Before she could ask more, the sound of boots thundering down the stairs echoed through the corridor they had just left. The guards were getting closer. Tyrion turned sharply to Rugen. "You never saw us." The man hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "I don't get paid enough for this." Tyrion didn't wait for more. He grabbed Sansa's hand, pulled open the trap door, and gestured for her to climb down first. The passage below was even darker than the dungeon above, but there was no choice. Swallowing her fear, Sansa descended into the unknown, Tyrion following close behind. As the trapdoor shut above them, the shouts of the guards faded, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. The escape had begun. The passage smelled of damp earth and stagnant water. Sansa's hands trembled as she gripped the rough walls, steadying herself in the utter darkness. She could hear Tyrion's breathing behind her, quick and shallow. Somewhere above them, the Red Keep was erupting in chaos. The king was dead. She had killed him. Her body shook with the weight of it, but she pushed forward, following the narrow tunnel blindly. Tyrion had said this led out, but where? And what awaited them beyond the keep's walls? "We need to keep moving," Tyrion murmured, his voice low but urgent. "They'll be castle apart looking for you." Sansa's breath hitched. For me, Joffrey had been hated, even among his own men, but that wouldn't save her. Cersei wouldn't rest until she was dragged before the Iron Throne in chains if she was even allowed to live that long. The passage sloped downward, the air growing colder. They moved in silence, feet splashing in unseen puddles. Then the tunnel split. Tyrion hesitated for only a moment before taking the right path. "Come." Sansa followed, her heart pounding. "Where does this lead?" she whispered. "A way out," Tyrion said. "One my father doesn't know about." Sansa frowned, but there was no time to question. They hurried forward, walls tightening around them until they could barely walk side by side. The tunnel twisted, sloping downward once more before opening into a wider chamber. A faint glow flickered ahead. Sansa nearly gasped. Light. Tyrion placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her behind a stack of crates. "Careful," he warned. Sansa peeked through a gap in the crates and felt her stomach drop. 2 men stood near the tunnel's exit, torches in hand. They wore the red cloaks of the City Watch the Gold Cloaks, Joffrey's men. And worse, they were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "They say she killed him with her own hands," one guard muttered. pushed him like a common street rat. The other spat onto the ground. She'll wish she died before they catch her. The queen will see to that. Sansa's throat tightened. The first guard chuckled. If they don't find her by morning, Cersei will start taking Stark heads until she crawls out of hiding. A sickening chill crawled up Sansa's spine. They wouldn't just come for her. They'd go after anyone with Stark blood left in King's Landing. Tyrion cursed under his breath. We need to get past them. Sansa barely heard him. All she could think about was her little sister, Arya. If Cersei thought Arya was still in the city, Sansa swallowed hard. She'd never stop until every Stark was dead. Her grip tightened into fists. There was no turning back. Tyrion's mind raced. They couldn't turn back, and they couldn't wait the longer they stayed, the higher the risk of more guards arriving. He glanced at Sansa, her face pale but set with determination. There was only one way forward. Tyrion exhaled, steeling himself. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Sansa barely had time to nod before he stepped out from the shadows. "Ah, my good men," Tyrion called out in that confident, dismissive tone he used whenever dealing with fools. "I assume you're standing here because you were ordered to block all exits?" The guards spun, startled. Their grips on their weapons tightened the moment they recognized him. "My lord," one of them stammered. "We weren't expecting—" "No, you weren't," Tyrion cut him off smoothly, taking another step forward. "Which is why I'll give you the chance to walk away now, before you get yourselves killed." The taller of the two guards narrowed his eyes. "Killed? By who?" Tyrion sighed, shaking his head. "You poor, brainless idiots." He gestured toward the tunnel behind him. "Do you honestly think my father hasn't already sent men into these tunnels? Do you think Cersei Sesteris trusting the likes of you to guard something this important?" He took another step forward. "She's already sent the real hunters. You'll be dead before you see them coming." The shorter guard hesitated, exchanging a glance with his companion. Tyrion pressed on. "You can stand here like good little dogs and wait to be gutted, or you can leave now and pretend you never saw me." He shrugged. "Your choice." The tall guard's grip wavered on his sword. "You're bluffing." Tyrion sighed dramatically. "Am I? Or am I simply warning you before the real butchers arrive?" It was a gamble. If they saw through his lie, it was over. Seconds stretched. Then, the shorter guard cursed under his breath. "I don't like this, Ed. Let's just go." The tall guard hesitated then. With a final glance at Tyrion, he swore and lowered his sword. "Fine." He shot Tyrion a glare. "But if you're lying, Lannister, the Queen will have your head next." "I'll be sure to let her know you said that," Tyrion said smoothly. Without another word, the two guards turned and hurried down another passageway, their torches flickering in the darkness. Tyrion let out a breath and turned to Sansa. "Come, my lady. Our path is clear." Sansa stared at him, stunned. How did you—" "Lying is an art," Tyrion said with a smirk, "and I happen to be a master." They hurried through the now unblocked tunnel. A cold wind brushed against Sansa's skin. An exit. Freedom was near. But she knew, deep in her heart, that Cersei would never stop hunting her. This was only the beginning. The tunnel opened into the sewers beneath King's Landing, the stench making Sansa gag. The air was thick with rot, the walls slick with filth. Tyrion didn't seem to notice her, more likely, was simply too focused on their next move. "Not much farther," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "If we follow this path, we'll reach the docks." Sansa shivered. The weight of her dress was unbearable, the rich fabric dragging against her legs as she stepped through the filth. She had never been anywhere like this, never imagined herself escaping like some common fugitive. But that was what she was now, wasn't it? A fugitive. A traitor. Joffrey's face flashed in her mind as shock. The way his body had crumpled, the blood on the stones. She had done that. She had wanted to do that. A part of her still trembled with fear. But another part deep inside felt something else. Not regret. Not sorrow. relief. Tyrion glanced at her, his face unreadable in the dim torchlight. "Keep moving," he said, his tone softer than before. She obeyed. Their footsteps echoed in the tunnels. Every splash of water, every drip from the ceiling sounded deafening. If anyone was searching for them down here, they would hear them coming long before they saw them. Tyrion seemed to sense her fear. "I have a ship waiting," he said. "A Bravosi merchant, bought and paid for." Sansa's breath hitched. "Bravos?" He nodded. "Far enough from Cersei's reach, for now. The Iron Bank doesn't kneel to the Lannisters." Sansa had never seen Bravos, had barely heard of it except in passing. It was a city of sailors and sellswords, of traders and temples. A world away from Winterfell, from everything she had ever known. But Winterfell was gone. Her father was gone. Her mother, her brothers. She swallowed hard. If she stayed in Westeros, she would die. If she ran, she had a chance. She tightened her jaw. "Let's go." Tyrion gave her a sharp look, as if reassessing her. Then he smirked. "Good girl." They pushed forward. The tunnel began to widen, the air growing fresher. A sliver of moonlight shone through an iron grate up ahead. The end of the passage. Then a voice rang out behind them. "Stop right there." Sansa froze. Tyrion spun, reaching for the small dagger at his belt. The torchlight flickered, revealing 3 figures stepping into the tunnel behind them. Gold cloaks. Sansa's heart pounded. Not now. Not when they were so close. The lead guard stepped forward, sword drawn. "Lady Stark," he sneered, "the Queen wants to have a word with you." Sansa's breath caught in her throat. Cersei had found her. Tyrion tightened his grip on his dagger, his face darkening. "Run," he muttered to Sansa. "I'll hold them off." Sansa's eyes widened. "No! Go!" For a moment she hesitated. She had spent so long being afraid, being powerless. But then, something inside her hardened. She turned and ran. Sansa sprinted toward the grate, her heart slamming against her ribs. The tunnel walls blurred around her, the cold night air just beyond her reach. Behind her, she heard the clang of steel as Tyrion lunged at the gold cloaks, his dagger flashing in the dim torchlight. "Get the girl!" one of the guards shouted. Sansa reached the iron grate and gripped the rusted bars, her fingers slick with sweat. It wouldn't budge. No, no, no! Panic clawed at her throat. She turned back just in time to see Tyrion slashing at one of the guards, his blade slicing across the man's leg. The guard roared in pain, stumbling, but the other 2 closed in. "I can't leave him." But if she stayed, she'd be captured or worse. Another guard lunged for her. Sansa barely ducked in time, scrambling backward. The man sneered, reaching again. Then suddenly a shadow moved in the darkness. A massive shape emerged from the tunnel behind the gold cloaks, moving with lethal precision. A flash of steel. A gurgling scream. The tallest guard dropped to his knees, clutching his slit throat. The others barely had time to react before the newcomer struck again. A massive blade cleaving through the second man's chest. Blood sprayed the tunnel walls. The last guard turned just in time to see the figure step into the torchlight. Sandor Clegane, the Hound. His burned face twisted into a grimace. "You fools should have run while you had the chance." The last guard barely managed to lift his sword before Sandor's greatsword crashed down, shattering steel and bone alike. He fell with a sickening crunch, unmoving. Silence. Tyrion wiped blood from his dagger and let out a ragged breath. "Well," he muttered, "that was unpleasant." Sansa stood frozen, her chest heaving. The Hound turned to her, his dark eyes unreadable. "You killed him," she whispered. Sandor snorted. "What? Were you expecting a trial?" He kicked one of the corpses aside. "You want to live, little bird? Then move." Sansa swallowed hard. She had no love for the Hound, but at this moment, he was her only chance. Tyrion gestured toward the grate. "Help me with this." Sandor grabbed the bars and, with a grunt of effort, ripped the rusted grate from the stone wall. Cold, salty air rushed in, stinging Sansa's face. Beyond the tunnel, the docks stretched before them. A few ships swayed in the harbor, their lanterns flickering like distant stars. Their escape. Sansa turned back to Sandor. Why are you helping me?" The Hound scowled. "Because I hate that little shit of a king as much as you did," his lips curled. "And because I'd rather see you free than left to Cersei's mercy." He stepped aside. "Now run, girl." Sansa hesitated for only a moment, then she did. She ran, her heart pounding, her breath sharp in the cold night air. Behind her, Tyrion and Sandor followed. They had escaped the Red Keep, but the hunt had only just begun. The cold night air hit Sansa like a slap, but she didn't stop running. The docks stretched before her, dark and empty, save for a few flickering lanterns swaying in the breeze. The sea smelled of salt and freedom, but she knew it wouldn't last. Behind her, Tyrion limped slightly as he kept pace, blood smeared on his tunic from the fight. The Hound moved like a predator, his sword still dripping red, his burned face twisted in something close to a scowl. "There," Tyrion panted, pointing to a small Braavosi ship moored at the end of the dock. "That's our way out." Sansa's heart leaped. They were so close. Then, the bells of the Red Keep began to toll. Her stomach dropped. The alarms had been raised. "Shit," Sandor growled. "They'll be here any minute." They ran faster. A few sailors stood on the deck of the waiting ship, watching their approach with wary eyes. One of them, a tall, thin man with dark skin and a sharp gaze, stepped forward. "Lannister," he called. His accent was thick, the words slightly clipped. "You took long." Tyrion didn't slow down. "We had complications." The Braavosi man frowned, his eyes flicking to Sansa and Sandor. This was not part of the deal. Tyrion threw a heavy pouch into his hands. "It is now." The man caught it, waited, then shrugged. "Get on. Now." They didn't wait for a second invitation. Sansa was the first up the gangplank, her hands trembling as she gripped the railing. She turned back just in time to see movement at the far end of the docks. The gold cloaks. They had found them. "There!" one of them shouted. "Stop them!" Arrows whistled through the air. One embedded itself in the wood beside Sansa's hand. She gasped and stumbled back. Sandor roared, turning to face them. "Go! Get on the fucking ship!" he charged. The Hound met the first soldier with a brutal swing of his greatsword, splitting the man's helmet open. Blood sprayed the dock. The others hesitated, but only for a moment. Tyrion shoved Sansa toward the ship. "Go, go, go!" She scrambled onto the deck, her pulse hammering. The Braavosi captain barked orders, and the ship lurched as the crew moved to set sail. Sandor fought like a beast, cutting down another man before turning back toward the ship. But the gold cloaks were swarming. There were too many. "Get on!" Sansa screamed. The Hound hesitated then. With a final snarl, he turned and ran. He sprinted up the gangplank just as the ship began to pull away from the dock. A soldier lunged, but Sandor kicked him hard in the chest, sending him tumbling into the dark water below. And just like that, they were free. Sansa collapsed onto the deck, her chest heaving. She could still hear the shouting from the docks, the frustrated cries of the guards as the ship drifted farther and farther away. She looked up at the Red Keep, glowing in the moonlight. She had escaped. She had killed Joffrey. And now, she was no longer the scared little bird in a golden cage. She was something else entirely. Tyrion sat beside her, letting out a long breath. "Well," he muttered, "that could have gone worse." Sansa turned to him, her eyes steeled with something new, something dangerous. "No," she said softly. "It went exactly as it should have." She turned to the open sea, the wind pulling at her hair. Let Cersei come. Let Westeros curse her name. She was free now. and she would never be a prisoner again.